This video is a continuation of part 1 from last week, though the order in which you watch them truly doesn't matter. In this component, we are focusing on the second half of the main 6. I will preface by saying that these are my personal interpretations of the characters and do not transgress the boundaries of headcanon-based redesigns. They are bound to be different to yours and other fans' interpretations due to being unique to my perspective, and that is the beauty of headcanons. Moving on to my second favourite of the main 6, Rarity. Originally in 2022 I had her down as light coquette, or more specifically dollette, but I did switch to an old money aesthetic in my new illustration as it makes more sense with what elements her character is influenced by. Rarity does tap into conventions of the seductress character archetype ever so slightly, and when I imagine a seductress character I usually imagine tight dresses and those really fluffy scarves, which I found out are actually called shawls. So I gave Rarity a shawl and a bodycon dress. Endless love. Definitely influenced by what she wore in the season 9 finale, but also inspired by this gorgeous piece of fan art by SunnySun31 on Twitter. Her dress is low cut and sleeveless, most likely backless as well in order to reflect her confidence. I also gave her pearls to reflect the old money aesthetic I'm going for, but also to reflect the white tones of her coat on her original design. And I kept the palettes relatively blue in terms of hue to harmonise with her eyes. Where my idea for Fluttershy came straight to me, I genuinely had no idea what Rarity would look like as a human. Originally when I looked at Rarity, I had interpreted her human form to look a little bit like Vivian Leigh, particularly from her role as Blanche in Streetcar Named Desire, but I also wanted to make Rarity Balkan. But I also wanted to give Rarity really long dreadlocks, as a certain interpretation of her curls could very well resemble dreadlocks. The general census seems to depict her as French, or South Korean, or both, but I made her Indian British in my first draft from 2022 because I was a little bit stuck. More info on why I decided to change this will be mentioned later. Eventually, in my new design, I had made her mixed Romanian and Kenyan. And I do confess that there was a little bit of influence from Lady Dimitrescu. I used a thickened variant of my regular brush for line work and sketching in order to draw her hair. I don't think it particularly resembles dreadlocks as much as a more specialised brush could, but it definitely differentiates the rich texture of her hair from others. And before anyone asks, that is incense and not a cigarette. Though, in my interpretation, if any of the main 6 were to be smokers, it would definitely be Rarity or Rainbow Dash. I can imagine the only thing they could ever bond over or get along with is through sharing cigs. Lastly, since it's Rarity we're speaking of, I want to mention makeup. Most of my redesigns were kept simple in terms of their makeup, mostly keeping it natural with some mascara and white eyeliner highlights as per my regular art style, but Rarity obviously keeps her blue eyeshadow, also some added dark pink tones of blush and deep crimson lipstick. Rarity also has her hair dyed purple because why not? The blue eyes are up to interpretation if they are contacts or not. It's not impossible to have dark skin and light coloured eyes, for example, albinism, but it is very rare. I don't really know what Rarity's romantic attraction would be towards, so I've just put Sapphic for now, obviously not ignoring her marriage with Applejack. I know Appledash is technically endgame, but I've always been a Rarajack girly, and this is my headcanon, so AJ is with Rarity. Rarity I also interpret to be asexual. I am slightly taking influence from their colour palette correlations with the pride flags just due to common association within the fandom, and I agree with it. She is also an atheist, possibly humanist or individualist as well. Can't explain why, just get the vibe. The reason I switched Rarity's ethnicity is due to looking at her family. I definitely interpret her mother to be at least African American, whereas her father, I'm getting sort of Balkan vibes from him. And Sweetie Belle can keep her afro as well. In regards to her African heritage, I've put Kenya for now, but I was thinking of potentially changing it to Burkina Faso or another nation that was once a French colony, which would then explain her canon use of French within the show due to it being one of her native languages. Then her mid-Atlantic accent is also explained due to English not being her first language. Next up is Twilight. As a non-American viewer, I see Twilight as having the strongest American accent out of the main six after Applejack, so I knew I wanted to keep her ethnicity within the North American region. I think one of the reasons I settled on Mexican is because a couple mutuals of mine who kin Twilight are actually Mexican themselves. She was Mexican in my first interpretation, but I switched to Native American on my sheet, and now I'm switching back to my original idea. She will definitely have Native American ancestry though. I definitely see her as having medium to darker toned skin, possibly influenced by her coat being a darker shade of purple, though the levels of coat and skin tones don't always correlate. More so, I am agreeing with what the Equestria Girls director had stated regarding her wanting Twilight to have a darker skin tone if they were to be less stylised. A popular interpretation is Indian British Twilight, which I love the idea of, especially being an MLP fan from the UK, but I can't really see her as British myself due to her canonically having such a thick, almost Valley Girl accent. A lot of the outfits are recolours of their latter Equestria Girls attire. Some of them I did stylise, but I kept Twilight's relatively similar due to it matching my interpretation quite well, only changing the colours to be more dark academia inspired. I chose this aesthetic for Twilight due to it matching her studious attitude, as well as the darkness matching her name and aesthetic being based on the dusk and darker hours of the day. I imagine she didn't always follow this aesthetic until she came to Ponyville and Rarity helped her find her style. I did admittedly make her hair a lot longer than it is on her original pony form, but I thought it made for a more intricate character silhouette, also giving me an excuse to draw long flowing hair. She is also agnostic. I didn't know the most common religion in Mexico, so I googled it and apparently it is Roman Catholic. So maybe she was raised in that sector of Christianity but left the church at a later age after realising it wasn't for her. Originally I was going to make her atheist due to her keenness within science in season 1, but settled on making her agnostic as I believe she would be open to all beliefs and interpretations rather than settling on just one. In line with her colour palette, I made her bisexual. I put dated -- as I did ship them back in 2018 and they are the only two left of the main six, but it is subject to change. I read a comment on TikTok that Fluttershy has social anxiety disorder with the shyness and Twilight has it without, and I agree with them. I have also personally always seen Twilight as having OCD in line with the famous fan theory that she does. It should be noted that a lot of my neurodivergent headcanons are inspired by fans with these conditions that relate to these specific characters and not due to stereotypes. You may have also noticed that I had removed Twilight's glasses, and that is because my original design depicts Psy Twi, whereas this design depicts Princess Twi. Applejack stays relatively true to her Equestria Girls design due to it having such a close to natural colour palette either way. I imagine her to look a lot like Calamity Jane, with the blonde hair and tan skin, also keeping her pale green eyes. Applejack is an Applejack without her freckles, so she has them too, but are vastly more prominent than Fluttershy's. She keeps her cowgirl hat and cowgirl boots, and some sort of cuffed/flare jeans as well, as I associate them with AJ. She also has a sort of tube top as well for practicality reasons, working in the fields within the heat. She is relatively tall and well built. The general fandom census seems to depict her that way, but I also believe that it makes sense due to the strength she exhibits within the show, as well as her occupation being quite heavy in terms of physical action. I knew AJ was undeniably from the southern states of the USA, but I was unsure if it was a New Orleans or Texas accent, so I googled it and it seems to be Texas, so that's what I went with. Everyone I know from Texas is Christian, so I've made her Protestant. The general fandom census sees her as lesbian, and I agree. As previously mentioned, I know Apple Dash is endgame, but I have always been a Rarajack shipper. And this concludes part 2. Here are all the main six together and some little height charts I had designed for them. This collection will have an additional part, as there are some other characters I had felt inspired to design as well, but alas, I will officially conclude the video here. Thank you for watching and listening, and good night.